Great. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this open meeting of the Science and Engineering Policy Committee of the National Science Board. I am Julia Phillips. I have the privilege of chairing the Committee on National Science and Engineering Policy. Matt Malkin is our committee vice chair. I'd like to begin today by taking a roll of committee members, beginning with Suresh Babu.
Here.
Joan Farini-Mundy. Yolanda Gill. Juan Gilbert.
Here.
Dorota Brzezinska. Mel Huff. Matt Malkin, I believe, will be joining us about a half hour late. Willie May. And Ryan Panchadsaram.
Here, Julia. I think Mel might have
Great,
just joined
thank
as
you.
well too, by the way.
Okay, thank you. Mel Huff? Okay, well, we'll check the participants in a couple of minutes, so thank you. We also expect a few report reviewers on the line. Roger Beachy, whom I see, yes, Marvi Matos Rodriguez, and Merlin Theodore, I believe is, yes, Merlin is here as well. So are there other board members or board consultants on the line today? Okay, today we are going to have our detailed narrative outline, or DNO, discussion and vote for the third, and this is the final report of Indicators 2026 suite. Translation to impact. I'd like to thank in advance my fellow SEP committee and board members for your engagement in this cycle, and also, of course, to NCSES for your continued outstanding partnership and wonderful work as we continue to implement the changes to the suite that the board approved in May of 2024. This is always challenging, and perhaps even more so this particular cycle, but I think some very exciting things are coming out of it. Indicators, of course, is prepared under the guidance and direction of the board by the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, or NCSES. NCSES is an independent federal statistical agency located within the NSF. We are always so grateful to be working so collaboratively with our NCSES colleagues. Staff sent an outline in the form of a draft narrative outline, or DNO, that summarizes the topics, data sources, and substantive changes from the 2024 editions that the authors have planned. And of course, this is a merger of multiple thematic reports from Indicators 2024. Just a reminder about what we're trying to accomplish today. This is a major opportunity consideration of this outline for board members to shape the content of the report. Pen has not been put to paper to write a completely coherent set of text, but rather more the indication of what will be in the report. And so it's at this point that board inputs and suggestions are particularly helpful and will have the most impact to our NCSES colleagues. So it's not your last chance for input, but it's probably your best chance for input. This is particularly true this cycle, given how we have shifted our approach to report development. Your input during the DNO stage is absolutely critical. We will vote on the outline at the end of today's call, but this vote will be taken with the understanding that NCSES will revise the DNO as appropriate based on the conversation that we have today. The revised and final DNO will be shared with the full SEP committee. NCSES has also shared a list of report reviewers, as they always do. If you have suggestions for the reviewer list, perhaps additional perspectives or other topical areas of expertise, please email that information to Matt Malkin and me, and also copy Amanda Vernon. We will share suggestions with NCSES as they finalize the reviewer list in their broader process to ensure balanced coverage of each report's topical areas. We will not be discussing listed or potential reviewers by name on this call. So that continuing conversation should be done by email, please. Following the presentation by the report authors, the lead reviewer, Roger, will start the discussion, and then will be followed by the other two board reviewers, Marvi and Merlin. Then we will open up for general committee discussion with the authors. At the end of the discussion, if we have a quorum of the committee, we will vote on the approval of the narrative outline, subject to any input that we may give the authors today. Before we get started into that, does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Let's, at this point, we're going to turn the floor over to the report authors, Carol Robbins and Francisco Morris. Carol, I think we're starting with you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Okay, so the title of this new report is Translation to Impact, U.S. and Global Science, Technology, and Innovation Output. And I think that that title is a nice summary of how we think about the tail end of the innovation process. Next slide, Steve, please. So the purpose of the report is, in fact, to talk about this system of activities, translation to impact. And in that process, we're going to be analyzing domestic and global trends in invention, technology transfer, business startups, and we're going to combine it this time with a discussion of trade and production by R&D intensive industries. And I think that's a nice way to make a whole package. We're going to focus the report this year, as we have to because we are consolidating on the areas of change in the US and global indicators on these topics that I've raised: technology transfer, critical technologies, business dynamics, which is the formation of new firms, as well as a venture capital investment and production and trade. As we have done in the past, our report will be accompanied by supplementary data files. However, in March of 2026, we'll have the new indicators data tool. And so some of the data that you are used to from this report, perhaps patents and trademarks, will roll into that data tool. Next slide, please. So the notable changes, as I mentioned, is that we're taking two reports and combining them into one. The first one is the one that I have worked on for several cycles: invention, knowledge transfer, and innovation. And then the other report, a logical bookmark to it, is the production and trade of knowledge and technology intensive industries. And Francisco Morris, who you will hear from after I'm done, is the lead author there. In both cases, this new report will cover domestic or international geographic information, in some cases both, and we're going to highlight available statistics on critical technologies. That's the way we're going to try to hone down. We won't be able to cover every single industry in every kind of detail, but that's the way that we intend to focus. And the critical technologies that have come out of CHIPS and Science are one area that give us a direction to look at. Next slide, please. So the way that we're going to organize the report is, in the introduction to the report, we're going to bring in a new sidebar. And that sidebar is going to talk about how the impacts of science and engineering activity are measured. And I think that that's a particularly salient topic in the current environment. What we're going to do in that sidebar is talk about both short-term and long-term impacts and what the measurement approaches are to address both of those kinds of things, and then the variety of impacts that can be considered: economic, of course, but also social and also health impacts. And we're also going to provide context and connection to the deep academic research literature that goes back to the 1950s on estimating the share of economic growth due to innovation and R&D activities. And so next slide, please. Okay. So the report will include the technology transfer indicators that you probably are used to in earlier reports. And the purpose here is to give a sense about how public funding of science and engineering activity makes broader impacts. So what we're going to look at is the licensing of technologies from federal agencies and academic institutions, as well as citations to government and academic research that one would find in patents. And that, I think, is a particularly salient indicator of the impact of research into private sector and economic output. In this section, we're going to have a sidebar that's going to put some of the intellectual property measures that we use in this report in context. Some of the indicators that we have are really come from administrative data, right? The registration of patents and trademarks, not necessarily set up to measure innovation. So we're going to talk about what the value of those indicators are, perhaps what are other measures that we don't have that we would like to have, and give the reader an understanding of how to weight the different indicators that you see here. With the patent data that we're going to provide, we're going to focus on patented inventions in the critical technologies that we've been discussing. And we're going to be able to compare this time between USPTO patents granted and international patent families, those granted in other countries. And we're going to include citation weighting, which I think is going to give an indication of perhaps quality or impact. Next slide, please. In the innovation section, we're going to focus on new products and services in the US market, and we're going to use trademark data for that, rich geographic distribution, so we can talk about where new businesses are being created and what kinds they are. We're also going to talk about open source software, which is a topic that we introduced in 2022, 2 cycles ago, and this time we're able to expand those data. We're going to talk about the growth in open source software. We're going to talk about the locations where developers live. And then we're also going to talk about the collaboration relationships between countries in a similar way that you have seen with bibliometrics, but I think this is going to give a richer, a broader dimension of the activities that are taking place. We're going to have 2 sidebars in this section. One is going to talk about artificial intelligence activity in business and government. We'll have some business survey data and then information from government websites. And finally, we're going to talk about how innovation is compared across countries. There are many ways that this is done. Some is survey-based, some is based on economic measurement, and there are other approaches as well. And in this sidebar, we will cover some of that territory and give the reader some indication of the perhaps the caveats that they may want to keep into account when they're looking at other kinds of data. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Francisco Morris.
Thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. So moving on to the last 2 sections of the report. Section 3 is a new section covering business dynamics and investment. So we have a number of indicators called from Carol's report and other sources. So starting with company births, these are new establishments from the Census Bureau database. And we will be focusing there on high technology industry. So these are new establishments, new companies. And alongside that, we also have university startups. These are new companies that are related to technology transfer activities of universities, for example, science parks and the like. Then we move on to small business innovation research and a related tech transfer program funding. This is a program funded by federal R&D agencies, the largest agencies, and we'll be covering some awards. And the focus here is on smaller companies that are bringing new products to the market, and that's the focus of this SBIR program. Moving on to private sector funding, venture capital. Venture capital is a form of private equity investment that is focused on early stage companies, high risk companies, and of course, most of this funding is geared to high-tech activities, high-tech products, high-tech industries. So we'll be having US as well as international data for that. And we end up with a new indicator on foreign direct investments, which is long-term investment based on equity ownership. And these are financial type of data and also activity data. For the US, this comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and we may include international data as we are able to find if they are focused on the industries that we are interested for the report. So with that section, the next section. So this section 4 is really a streamlined version of the KTI report that you may be familiar with, having a focus on production and international trade. And of course, the focus is on KTI industries, knowledge and technology intensive industries, as we call it, which are really R&D intensive industries. This classification is based on in an OECD ranking or classification. And we are having, as usual, there are two major indicators, production measured as value added, and international trade. And we will have quite a bit of detail for the US, complementing data from BEA and other sources, Bureau of Economic Analysis and other sources, as well as international data from S&P Global, which is a major business and data provider for the market. And we are ending that section with a sidebar on KTI value-added production by state. This sidebar was enhanced in the 2024 cycle based on board input, and we plan to enhance, to update and enhance this information with a sidebar for this larger report. So with that, we plan to release the report is planned to be released in January 2026. And so I guess I will be opening for questions. So I pass it on to Julia. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Carol and Francisco, for describing what is going to be in this report. Just one, before I turn it over to Roger, just one quick question, and that is, Carol, you talked about the emphasis on critical and emerging technologies, which I think is very important. Is that operative throughout the entire report, or is that primarily in your part of the report?
I think that Francisco can speak to it, but I think our intention is it will tie across both sides of translation to impact, right, Francisco?
Yeah, that's correct. So, for example, in the industry classification that we use, which is a worldwide industry classification, we have the computer industry, and then of that we have semiconductors, for example. So,
right.
So we will be able to dig into some of the industries that touch into critical technologies as well for production and trade, Julia.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, now I am going to turn to our primary reviewers for this report, and the lead reviewer is Roger Beachy. Roger?
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Carol and Francisco, for the introduction to what we're going to be seeing in the report as it comes. I thought it was helpful to receive the translation DNO, but I also appreciated receiving the other materials that were associated that Amanda and Julia set out, and it sort of helps to inform the thought process that links the three major chapters together. And I appreciated seeing some of that because it surprised me. There's some information there that I didn't know we had, and so it will color some of my comments, but not really, since I saw those after I read the DNO. So I appreciate. I hope you'll take those into account. I was pleased in section 1 to see that the focus is on licensing rather than on patents. A few years ago, it was the other way around, and so I appreciate you've done it. Do we feel like you? So I've got a number of questions along the line here, and I don't know if I should go through all of them, Julia, or just a few, but I'm reluctant to give up the stage if I have the microphone. So because I know more of you will have a lot too, and others. So I'm going to take the liberty here of giving them.
Go for it. You're the lead reviewer for a reason, Roger.
Thank you very much. In the sidebar that you've mentioned, there's a bullet here in the DNO on counts and stage of implementation of federal agency A&I projects. Can you explain a little bit further what message will the reader be left with, with the private sector leading this effort in large part? As what is the goal that you'll be showing? Mostly, will this be private sector information? I take it, or will there be other things that come out from the federal agencies that you think will make a major contribution here?
Well, that's a really good question. There are two different data sources. One with regard to the business sector would be based on a widely a widely covered business survey, right? Which is asking about how have you taken up artificial intelligence? And so one can imagine that that's broader in terms of the whole economy than just the activity of federal agencies. There's information that is provided on a federal website about stages of the projects that the federal government is engaged in. As you well know, real estate is very scarce in the report. And so if that's not an area of particular interest, that's the kind of information we would like to have.
No,
That, that you'd rather see more of something else.
No, it is of interest. I'm just, my concern, my interest is really to showcase what private sector is doing and then help the agency and others who fund research to understand the role of the federal government in the efforts in AI, given the lead and that is in the technology sector. So that's the reason for the question. Making sure that we adequately present the role that the federal agencies have versus private sector, so that our investments are placed in the right. For our agency, for example, the NSF, what is it that this agency should do, or the DOE or NASA, and how important are those? Or should our investments be elsewhere as a consequence of the lead that private sector has? There is in the citations in that next major bullet, there is information about, I mean, you've indicated that you're going to show academic research cited in business patents, especially for biotechnology and for other data that are there. Sounds interesting. I'm interested in the scope of that section. How do you see that rolling in? And as a consequence of the reading of the other documents, what percentage of the U.S. economy is linked to biotech versus other technologies, and how will this report lead into prioritization of research that's done by the agencies, either NIH or NSF or NASA or DOE or whatever? Do you see that the impact will be on? I know this is not a policy focus, but how do you see presenting this information so that policymakers can make decisions about where to invest? Sort of a continuation of my last comments. And then there's the information about where China is and where Europe is and others, and the competitive edge of the U.S. that might grow in this sector compared to other sectors. See what I'm getting at, Caroline? I apologize for being sort of diffuse here, but my interest is in what we present and then how policymakers respond as a consequence of a report like this one, given the competitive edge of the U.S. and the edge that China has in certain areas.
I really appreciate the way that you're focusing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Francisco and I and the other co-authors thought about how do we take these critical technologies and tell a story throughout the report. And so on the indicator that you first started talking about, which would be the impact of, say, federally funded or academic research that shows up in patents. Well, we see this a lot in biotechnology, right? That's a place where the impact can be seen. Now, what we wouldn't have is the comparison to the same thing for China, but where we can be useful there is as we roll down to the comparison of, unfortunately, we're coming to patents, but that's a very valuable data source. We can look at US and China and the critical technology areas and what are the levels and trends in patenting in these areas. And I think that's a way to get at what you're asking.
I think it is too. it's more and more interesting and concerning as we sort out across the global landscape of who is doing what and what we are best at and what others are better than we at, and then how we respond accordingly. And that's why this section, this whole section that you're talking about today is of interest to me. And especially as we compare and contrast between sectors and between regions, but Europe and US, if you like, as a group, and China and what they're leading at.
I think there's a lot of richness to this approach because I was just telling you what was from my side of the report, but what Francisco's got on this trade in these R&D intensive industries within the same report, we can begin to say, here is what the trade and production looks like in different countries, right, for different areas of technology. And I think that that's going to be a good way to tie it together. Francisco, do you want to say a little bit more about that? Because that generally is a discussion in your report about that international comparison.
Yeah, you said it well, Carol. Given that we are combining indicators from the whole spectrum, from innovation, early innovation process and licensing all the way to production and trade, to the extent that we can keep consistent categories in terms of industries or technologies across the indicators. I think it will be an interesting thing, even for us, Carol and me and our co-authors, to put together the report, because we will have the first chance in the single report to see all of those things kind of tying up together. So we are looking forward to ourselves to that kind of discovery, if you will, and research and writing when we start producing the report.
Thank you. That will be really interesting to read and watch develop. In section 3, in business dynamics and investment, the major bullet, then the second bullet under the major on the top, university technology startups and the autumn data that you'll present. Is there a way to look at economic impacts of the average startup by sector? And then, of course, that's regional as well. But that nexus of how many startups there are and what the economic impacts are, and whether or not these are how the sectors show themselves in terms of the major strengths that we're talking about in the earlier sections. You know, the strengths of the U.S., for example. How do you see tying those together from the economic activity of academics, which will be closely watched, I'm sure, as Congress looks at the role that research in the public sector plays in the overall economic activity of the country.
Sure, Roger. So I'm not sure that the database itself goes into impact for it, because she knows the database better than me, because I will be working on it now more closely. But however, there have been quite a lot of research over years, because the autumn data has a long history. So there is a lot of research precisely on that very question. So it's not so much about the autumn data itself, but it's more about modeling the effects of these companies in a number of ways to look at impact, in maybe tying with trade and production, for example. So it's not so much from the autumn database, but more we can rely or cite information or research that try to get at that very question. You know, from autumn companies like science parks, there's a lot of incubators, science parks, and there have been a lot of research, for example, linking companies with CVs, with patenting, with employment of students, and so on and so forth, right? So there is a lot of research out there that we can rely and bring a little bit here.
Good. I hope there is something that you bring something around the impact, either regional impacts and local impacts, and perhaps nationwide impacts that come from these kind of parks, if the data from autumn are available.
Sure, and again, here it's mostly about research that has been done answering those questions that combine yet different indicators, tying together a story from these companies on to impact. So yes, we can bring some of that, I think.
Okay, good.
At the same time, I think that the issue of impact of science and engineering and startups is, as Francisco suggests, a voluminous and decades-long literature, and there is a large industry who makes these estimates of varying quality. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put that sidebar there in the beginning, to give the reader some understanding about how to think about this. And at the same time, as we have been talking about through the indicator cycle, other topical reports, it may well be that impact is a rich enough topic for its own report.
Yes, good, thanks. I just have one more question, then I'll turn it to the others. Is it possible to show the Imperial Wealth Funds? We've talked about the investments from private sector. Is there a way to tap into information about Imperial Wealth Funds and the impacts that they have on country by country, or whether they are global impacts, Carol? Is this something that we
Sovereign
have
wealth
enough
funds.
Sovereign
That's what
wealth,
you mean?
sorry, I didn't, yeah, I knew it wasn't the right phrase, but I didn't know the right phrase. Yeah, Imperial is sovereign wealth, yes.
We'll look into it. I don't know the answer to that. We'll look.
Sorry, I've lost Carol.
I don't know
Yeah.
the answer to
Is
that
any-
question,
is-
but we will look.
Hey, Roger, maybe we've
Shucks.
lost you. Yeah, okay. Roger, okay. Thank you.
Carol, I didn't hear, would you summarize that? I have an unstable connection apparently.
Oh,
I missed
on
your
the
comment.
sovereign wealth funds? I
Yes,
think
please.
it's an interesting idea, and we have not done an in-depth look for those data, and I think it's something that we can look for. I can't promise you that we'll find something high quality and comprehensive, but we'll look.
Well, given what we've heard from this administration about interest in sovereign wealth, I just thought it might be timely, and it might add something useful to the report if you can find information. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Julia.
Okay, thanks very much, Roger. Okay, so now we're going to turn to the other two reviewers, and then we'll open it up more broadly. Merlin, let's turn to you first.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. I agree with everything that Roger said, and I was pretty happy to see the details behind the original outline. Only thing that I have to add is in the small business impact, based on what Francois just said, I was very, very happy to hear that the intent of that section is to capture the correlation between small business impact, small business to the economic impact, and the correlations to patents. As we collect more data and understand the impact from small businesses, I can very well see this being its own report. It is very important for justifying the basis of course, continuous funding for R&D activities. I do want to say one thing I don't see here, and maybe I miss it somewhere, but I think it's critical, is capturing the industry investments in R&D as a factor, because that in itself is also an impact.
Let me just insert here, industry investments are shown, it's a somewhat different taxonomy, in the discovery report.
Okay.
Yeah, at the same time, we plan to cite the previous reports that have come along. So yes, it's a separate report, but we will be citing, cross-referencing. So going along the lines of the question as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the last of the three reports out of the gate. And then there is the summary report, which synthesizes the highest level and what we judge to be the most important sets of data across all the reports, and maybe even some things that didn't make it into individual reports.
That's awesome. That's good to know. And also, like Roger, I was very happy to see licensing as opposed to patents. And also it will be critical to understand the correlation between patents or a combination of patents towards licensed technology.
Great.
That's what I have as a high level feedback, Julia.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Merlin. Marvi, over to you.
Can you guys hear me well? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Okay. So I have a number of comments. Also praise, the level of detail throughout the outline in the report. I'm really glad to see that there is information on investment, but not investment just from an industrial part or federal, but also venture capital. I was glad to see the sidebars on, for example, AI or open source software. That was a really nice, I think it was a really nice touch. And I have comments on that too. And so I'm going to start basically with some of the questions that I have. The first one is, on the first section, there's an AI sidebar, which is really interesting. And I was considering, just as it is included in that particular section of technology transfer, as I was reading the rest of the outline, I was thinking, okay, so what is the position of AI or influence of AI in this particular area, right? So when we go to section on innovation, when we go to section on business dynamics and investment, when we go to production and international trade, right? Like I started seeing that it might be interesting to see a thread through the report, if it's possible, on that particular subject and how it can be reflected into those different perspectives. Another potential area where I think it could be interesting to see is to in particular to AI is how maybe an explanation and also historical evidence of how AI plays in the cross-section of different areas, right? Because AI is an area within itself in R&D, but in addition to that, it actually influences and impacts all areas in R&D. What is that information, and how do you foresee those cross-sections playing a role in the in areas of innovation, in areas of investment, and so on? And so one question, and I had for specifically to in the areas of trade and was basically for and maybe the investigator Francisco here can help me with this. It's difficult for me to understand, and maybe this is going to be true for readers too, to understand how do you quantify trade when it comes to computational services, and specifically as different AI services continue to expand. How do you quantify that, right? What will be the methods in the future? What do you think about that, Francisco?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Marvin. So we're using an international industry classification that is comparable across countries, and that classification includes both the manufacturing area and also services, right? So then within services, AI could kind of follow in a number of industries. You can think about software industry, you can think about computer services industry, and also a third one will be R&D services, right? So in principle, since AI is so new, right, especially in the statistical, world, it could be argued that it could be diffused or distributed across a number of industries, even though we may not know the share, let's say, of the AI impact, but it would be somewhere, let's say, across those three industries. So for trade, the way we have the data against by industry, so we might get started to kind of triangulate a little bit, even if we cannot go all the way down to AI, at least identify some industries that are most likely to have impact or have activity in AI. And then you can compare that to, for example, patenting, right? It's much granular. It's much easier for Carol, for example, to say, hey, this is AI, or for publication, or for, right? So to the extent possible, yes, we will be happy to get into that question as much as possible and alert the reader about the limitations of the particular data. And then having a starting point for readers, reading our report, and hopefully our context will be good enough that the people can, with a more informed mind, to look at other reports and other data down the line. So hopefully we can give at least what we are able to do, especially across countries, which is even harder, right? So that's kind of the answer, that we will be able to do as much as we can, and then hopefully have good context for readers to, and ourselves to go on and as we go along with more research and more data.
Excellent. And so, you know, the reason why I asked this question is because
Yeah.
the center can actually place itself in two different roles here. One is to actually elucidate the data and help the reader interpret, you know, and see some of the data, right? But then in addition to that, there's also a side of methodology. And how do you quantify that data? And so the center, you know, it's actually positioning itself in the role of maybe teaching others of how to see this data and how to quantify it, which I think it's probably even more important than seeing the actual absolute numbers, right? It's the methodology of how to actually acquire that data. On the open software section, it's actually, I find that really interesting because I've also seen a lot of areas within research where there's, you know, people sharing more openly, of course. And so my question to you, and it's also to Francisco, you know, how do you see the potential information now, not just on open software, but on open research publications? And so what I mean by that is when people try to publish something or publish something for basically pre-peer review, right? And then they basically, as they are actually doing the research, then they eventually publish that research which has actually been influenced by this kind of like pre-peer review process. This is another, it's not open software, it's more like open publication. But I was wondering if you see any value on maybe that type of information. And what, I mean, do we even have data on how these iterative, you know, kind of like thought forums of information actually can influence back research and what we do?
Actually,
and maybe investments?
This topic is covered in the discovery report. I don't know if Ben Snyder is on our call today. He may be looking on YouTube, but you will find, and somebody can provide more detail about exactly how that's being covered. But it's a topic we picked up, I think, several cycles ago, and Ben and our colleague Clara have done a very nice job with it this year in discovery.
Okay,
And Benjamin
excellent. Okay, I look forward
appeared.
to it.
Benjamin, do
What
you
was
want to
that,
say
Julia?
anything?
Yeah,
Benjamin's here.
I don't want to take too much time talking about discovery when we're talking about the translation impact report, but we have been looking at open access, the exact process that you've described. I think we need to dig into a bit more. This is just open access as far as how they appear in peer-reviewed journals, but I think that that's an avenue that we're definitely going to be looking at now. It's very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Excellent. Excellent.
One last point, Marvin, on this is that we plan to cross-reference reports. So, for example, when we talk about AI in trade or patents or what have you, we plan to cross-reference reports because what Benjamin had done in discovery and what his own research over the long term. So, by cross-referencing, hopefully the reader will be able to, pick and choose what they need and hopefully use better the three reports altogether in some level.
Excellent. And so on the sidebar of, where you're doing country comparisons, I just again praising that is data which I look forward to see. This is under innovation. I think that section is it's very important as reference, right, for the for people who are policymakers, for people who are even venture capitalists, right, like would actually see that section with a lot of interest, I think. So that's I think that is a really good well put section. On patents, there were some comments maybe for on the patents, and I'm thinking that maybe something that might help within the report, and I don't know to what extent this is possible, but when a patent numbers are shared, which is necessary information, of course, as indicators, maybe pointing at, historically, in different areas, what has been the translation of patent to impact, right, to economic impact in different areas, might be something that is interesting. And this is not trying to look forward and model. This is trying to look backwards and see, in these areas, these many patents translate or have translated to, this economic impact, or, maybe something by country. This, it goes a little bit, maybe it's not deeper, it's just like, it gives more context to the importance of why patents are important, right? Like why the numbers are important. So just a thought. And then finally, just one more thing, on venture capital investments, that's a section that when I read the outline, I was asking I was trying to understand that in regards to what are the objectives of the information and what are the typical plots. I think this area, actually, this piece of information is really important. But I was thinking, what are the typical plots that you see? What are the typical comparisons that you see basically being published in that particular section?
Yeah, Francisco, I'll jump in here because I did that one last year. And so, Marvi, generally what we do is we look across countries and years and we say, who are the recipients of VC investment at the high level? And of course, as you know, you can do it based on deals and you can do it based on volume dollars. And in the last cycle, we did both. And then the other thing that we did was we focused on the US and what were the areas, right? What were the industries that got the most venture capital? And then the other thing that we did is we looked within states. So what we tried to do was touch 3 dimensions, which is US geography, again, by space and time, international by space and time, and then to give some dig into the industry areas.
Perfect. And thank you for that. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, on that point, Carol, I want to follow up from Marvi's question. One of the things that we've been interested in knowing is whether or not there's been a shift from the coasts to other areas of the country, and will the impacts of, let's say, TIP have on these in long-term trends? How many years of data do you have about the location and types of VC investments in the heartlands, for example, versus the coast? And do we have
that's
enough,
exciting.
do we have enough data to show a trend?
Yeah, we do. And in fact, in the last year's indicators, we were able to talk about in the wake of COVID, we did in fact see that venture capital did move in and dispersed within the United States from the coast. So we already saw some of what you've already said. And so perhaps with TIP, we'll see more. But I think COVID might have been the impetus for some of that originally. Perhaps the venture capitalists wanted to see, maybe they wanted to look a little more closely at their investments and have them closer to home. But we did see the geography move.
Great. And that
Excellent.
can be shown in a graph or in some sort of trend line. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. So thank you so much for entertaining all of my thoughts and questions, and thank you for adding information on startups. I think it's an excellent draft, and thank you for listening.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you. I'd like to reiterate the thanks to both Carol and Francisco for being so responsive. There have been a lot of discussions before we got to this outline. It's obvious that you were very responsive to that discussion, and this is an excellent draft. I'm going to open the floor for other committee and board members to ask questions. I'd ask that you keep them pretty brief because I'd like to wrap this up pretty soon. I know Ryan has been in the queue for a while, so I'll call on him first.
And I'll be quick. I think on the theme of translation, I think one question is on, call it the corporate business side, who's leading in a particular critical technology area, semiconductors, synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, or batteries? Because, these leaders are identifiable. They do come from countries. They have market caps that should be adding economic value. And I'd be curious at their edge and what their edge is. And so just this is sort of this kind of question. Is it important to surface the leading companies in particular critical areas? Because some of these companies put a huge amount of dollars behind R&D, and that's, I think, could statistically move the numbers and things that we're looking at. So that's one question, and maybe contribution is who's leading on X. On venture capital and pulling on the thread of translation, stage also matters as well. How many of them make it through formation, that seed Series A, to getting to scale, and then ultimately profitability? Because, this beautiful idea could happen in a lab, but if it's not standing on its own as a company on the other side, have we translated it well and have we supported it? And then I think I had a question, but semi answered with Merlin, which was like industry is in the discovery section. But one thing maybe in the report is to point to that. But, venture capital is really early stage, small business, the new starts. But a lot of the large companies are doing things beyond basic research that you would kind of consider venture capital, but inside a company. And so maybe it's pointing to the discovery report, but that's a big number and a lot of dollars are going towards it. And then the last quick comment on open source. AI could be a particularly interesting topic. I think it's perhaps the most exciting space where you have closed source companies versus the open source. And by gosh, they're both like really far neck and neck, and it's kind of exciting.
Great. Carol, Francisco?
Yeah,
Thoughts?
so I should have said that we do in fact do stage funding when we have venture capital. What we've got bar charts, and then we do it by stage. On the issue of the individual companies, that's actually a really important point. And if you think about the data, the best data that we have, we get from confidential surveys that are filled out by US companies under the promise of confidentiality. And so traditionally, we have not done a lot of calling out individual companies. The places where we do it would be in something that's public information, like patenting. Sometimes we'll do that, but we don't generally do a company by company rundown. I think that would be that would be a different kind of report, and it would use perhaps half of our data. But anyway, that would be my response there.
The one thing
on the open source, I like your idea.
The one thing I might add on that one, it's actually not to use any private data, but like it's very clear in semiconductors in the US, NVIDIA is the giant in that area. ASML is not an American company, but they're cutting edge on a particular category. Batteries, it's clear that, we have domestic competitors, but also international ones. So just using public data to help highlight, truly on the translation theme, there are companies that are pulling these industries forward and maybe just highlighting them to show where are we ahead, because we are in many areas, but we're also behind in a lot. And I think that's important to call out.
So we have done some of that, and we can certainly do more in the areas where the data are public. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Joan.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? My internet seems...
Yes. Yes, we're good. Oops, now you're muted.
All right, sorry. This is wonderful. It's a great chance to dive in and learn a lot about a new area that is so important. And my comments are brief and probably a bit naive because I am new to this one, but I do wonder under the technology transfer section if there would be any data available that might help us take a separate look at the involvement or contributions of graduate students to the innovation enterprise in general, maybe within the public knowledge flow piece about citations. So that's one. And then the other has to do also with universities, and that is about university investment in the patent processing enterprise and what that looks like. Maybe it's in the other report. Maybe there aren't data to help with that, but I do think a little more featuring of the role of the universities themselves in both supporting this all financially and also providing the knowledge base for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. The graduate students is not something we've tended to highlight in this report. There is coverage in the talent report on the activities of graduate students. I'm not sure we know how to sort out a graduate student from the data that we have on bibliometrics. However, with regard to the role of universities in patenting, indeed, that's data that we have and present every year. And so we can tell you what percentage of total USPTO patents are granted to a university affiliated individual. And then also Autumn data provides us actually with patents that have been reported to the Technology Transfer Office. So I do feel that that's one that we have pretty well covered.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any last brief comments or questions? This is amazing, and actually seeing 3 chunks of indicators rather than 9 or whatever we have had in the past is really helping in my own mind to get things, get in mind what a storyline in the summary report and in the board's companion document might look like. So thank you all from NCSES for your Herculean efforts to make this transition. I'm really excited about it. At this point, I would like to see if anyone else from NCSES leadership would like to add anything on this report.
Nope, just thanks everyone for your comments. This reimagining into 3 has been really interesting, and we cannot do it without just the feedback. We don't have data for everything. You know, we still do Fitness for Use statistical agency. And so sometimes we can't answer all your questions because it is a policy neutral report, but we really lean into that policy relevant. And as I say a lot nowadays, it's really important that we keep measuring and keep analyzing now more than ever. And it's important that what we're doing is very policy relevant. So our close collaboration with this group is very important. So thank you so much for your time and your energy. It makes the report so much better. And thank you very much to the team, Francisco, Carol. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christina, and everybody on NCSES. This is an amazing partnership, and we appreciate it very much. And you know, it is particularly important that we have a very crisp story to tell with the data to back it up. And so this is an essential piece of it. I think we're ready to vote. And Amanda, can you confirm that we have a quorum?
Yes, you're all set.
Good. Okay. So we are going to take a vote of the SEP committee, so committee members only, to approve the narrative outline as influenced by today's discussion. Only SEP members can vote. All who are in favor of the narrative outline, please unmute your microphones and say aye.
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 Is anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. So the motion has passed, the outline is approved, and Carol and Francisco, we look forward to moving to the next stage and really appreciate a wonderful discussion this morning.
Thank you so much.
So at this point, yeah, the SEI team in NCSES will develop the draft report, which will be distributed for committee and board review as part of the external review stage of the report development. This has been a particularly excellent discussion, and that concludes our business of the committee meeting for today. The meeting is adjourned at 59 minutes after the hour. Just a quick reminder for SEP members, please stay on the call.